The morning she found out, Lena was alphabetizing the accounts receivable files. That's the part nobody asks about. They want to know about Voss. They want to know about the gun, the contract, the moment she stopped being a woman with a normal Tuesday and became something else entirely. But the truth is, it started with the files. It always starts with something small and stupid. She'd been at Hargrove and Tate for 6 years. 6 years of arriving before anyone else, leaving after the cleaners, eating sad desk lunches while reviewing invoices nobody else wanted to touch. She was good at it. Good at finding the discrepancy buried on line 47 of a spreadsheet. Good at knowing when the numbers didn't add up. Good at being invisible in the way that useful people often are. Her name was Lena Ashford, and she was the best bookkeeper at a mid-sized accounting firm in a mid-sized city. And she was very, very tired. She found the transfer on a Wednesday. It wasn't supposed to be there. A routing number she didn't recognize, attached to a client she'd never heard of, filtered through a sub-account that technically didn't exist in the system. $60,000. Gone and back again in 48 hours, like it had just taken a short vacation. She printed it out, stared at it, printed it again in case the first copy had been wrong. It hadn't been wrong. She brought it to Preston. Preston Hargrove, junior partner, son of the man whose name was on the door, the man who had hired her when she was 23 and so desperate she'd have worked for sandwiches. Preston, who wore good suits and said things like, "We're a family here," while also forgetting her name at the Christmas party for 4 years running. He looked at the printout. He looked at her. He smiled the way people smile when something bad is about to happen to you, and they already know it. "Lena," he said, "you're so thorough. That's what I've always admired about you." She was fired by 4 o'clock. They gave her 2 weeks severance and a form to sign that said she wouldn't talk about internal financial matters to outside parties. She signed it. She was too tired not to. She took her stapler and her cardigan from the back of her chair, and she walked out into a grey October afternoon, and she stood on the sidewalk for a long time, not going anywhere. She didn't go home. She'd sublet her apartment 3 months ago, when the rent went up, and been splitting a place with her sister Tamsin ever since, which had seemed practical at the time, and now felt like a trap she'd walked into with her eyes open. Tamsin was fine. Tamsin was great. Tamsin was also the kind of person who responded to bad news with a glass of wine and an unsolicited opinion, and Lena couldn't absorb opinions right now. She went to a bar instead. Not a nice bar. She wasn't in a nice bar mood. She went to the kind of place that opens at noon and doesn't judge you for it. A bar on the edge of downtown called the Cartwright that had sticky floors, and a jukebox that only played songs from the 90s, and a bartender named something she immediately forgot. She ordered a whiskey, then another, then sat with a third one she wasn't drinking, just turning the glass around in her hands like it might eventually tell her something useful. At some point, someone sat down beside her. She noticed him the way you notice weather. Not all at once, but as a gradual accumulation of detail. A hand, first. Large, with a scar across the back of it, the kind of scar that doesn't come from a kitchen accident. A sleeve, dark, expensive in the particular way that doesn't advertise itself. Then the rest of him, settling onto the stool next to hers with the ease of a man who has never had to wonder whether there was room for him. He was older than her. Not old. Maybe 40, maybe a few years past. Dark hair, dark eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong once and healed anyway. The kind of face you'd trust if you didn't know better. She looked at him and then looked back at her glass. "You're going to drink that one," he said. Eventually. He ordered something she didn't catch. The bartender moved faster for him than he'd moved for her, which was interesting. "Bad day," he said. "Mediocre day with catastrophic implications," she said. "But thank you for asking." He made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh. She still didn't look at him. She was very focused on the glass. "I got fired today," she said, which was not the kind of thing she would normally say to a stranger, but she was on her 3rd whiskey and the afternoon had earned it. 6 years. And I'm not even angry about it. She stopped. "I found something I wasn't supposed to find. That's how these things go, right? You do the job too well and eventually the job becomes a problem." He was quiet for a moment. What kind of something, he said. Money that moved when it shouldn't have. Another pause. How much? He said. 60,000. Probably more. Probably a lot more. I only found the one transfer because it was in the wrong sub-account. If I'd kept looking, she caught herself, but I signed a form, so. She finally looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite classify. Attentive, careful. The way you look at something you haven't decided what to do with yet. What's your name? He said. Lena. He said it once, like he was noting it somewhere. What do you do with numbers when you find them in the wrong place? I fix them, she said. Or I used to. He picked up his glass, set it down. She had the odd sensation of being evaluated by someone who was very good at evaluating things. I have a problem, he said, with numbers in the wrong place. That's a very common problem. Mine is less common than most. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest was doing a strange thing. Some combination of whiskey and exhaustion and the particular recklessness of a woman who has just lost the last stable thing in her life. What's your name? She said. Voss, he said. Not a first name, a last name. The kind of name you give when your last name already means something. She knew the name. Everybody in this city knew the name, even the people who pretended they didn't. Voss, as in the 3 city councilmen who'd resigned in the last 5 years with no explanation, as in the dock workers' union that had very suddenly stopped having any labor disputes, as in the rumors that circulated in the particular way that true things circulate, not loudly, but persistently. She should have left. She finished her whiskey instead. How bad is your numbers problem? She said. Bad enough that I've gone through 4 accountants in 18 months. What happened to them? He looked at her. They quit, he said. Or they made mistakes. She understood from the way he said it that those were not the same category. I'm not going to help you do anything illegal, she said. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm asking you to find what's missing. There was a distinction there. She was too tired to figure out if it was a meaningful one. She gave him her number. She doesn't know why. She knows why. She was 31 years old, and she had $200 in her checking account, and a brother-in-law who had been asking pointed questions about when she was going to get her own place again, and she was very, very tired of being useful to people who didn't notice. He called the next morning. 8 a.m. exactly. The kind of person who calls at 8 a.m. exactly is either military or a sociopath, and she had a feeling Voss was neither, just a man who understood that punctuality is a form of power. You're serious, she said. I don't make calls I'm not serious about, he said. The office he brought her to was not what she expected. She'd expected something cinematic. Dark wood leather, a man behind a desk the size of a small country. What she got was 3 floors of what looked, from the outside, like an import-export company, and inside was exactly that, along with 6 other legitimate businesses that shared the same parent LLC and filed their taxes with the aggressive correctness of entities that have something to prove. His actual office was spare. A desk, a window, a whiteboard covered in what looked like organizational charts but weren't. A man named Fletcher who said nothing and stood near the door in the way that suggested standing near doors was his primary professional function. I need you to look at this, Voss said, and handed her a folder. She looked at it. Then she looked at it more carefully, the way you look at something that seems simple and then reveals itself to be a series of nested complications, each one containing a smaller and more troubling complication inside it. Someone's been pulling from your operating accounts, she said. Slowly. Small amounts over 2 years. Whoever did this is either very patient or they assumed nobody would look carefully. Nobody was, he said. Who has access to these accounts? He named 3 people. She noted the names, noted the flatness with which he said them, noted that one of them, a man called Riley, he said last and with a very brief pause before it. I'll need full access, she said. Every account, every sub-account, every holding. That's a significant amount of trust, he said. Yes, she said. It is. You can either give it to me or you can keep losing money to whoever this is. I don't have an opinion about which one you choose. He studied her for a moment. Fletcher shifted slightly near the door. Outside, a car passed on the street below, and the sound of it was the only thing in the room. Full access, Voss said, starting today. What followed was 3 weeks of the most interesting work she'd ever done. Not interesting in the way that it would look good on a resume. Interesting in the way that a code lock is interesting when you're the one who knows how to read the sequence. The money hadn't just been taken. It had been obscured, layered through subsidiary accounts, split into amounts just under the reporting thresholds, routed back in ways that would have read as normal operating expenses to anyone not looking for the pattern. Whoever had done this was good. Lena was better. She worked in an office they gave her on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked at a parking garage and a coffee machine that made the best espresso she'd ever had, and nobody asking her to also handle the mail or organize the holiday party schedule. Just her and the numbers. Voss came in every morning at 9. He didn't hover. She'd expected hovering. Instead, he'd appear, set a coffee on the corner of her desk without asking if she wanted one, and either stand at the window for a few minutes in silence, or pull the chair from the corner and sit across from her and ask what she'd found. He listened when she explained. Actually listened, which was more unusual than it should have been. On the 8th day, she found the account. It was small, barely 6 figures, sitting in a holding company registered in Delaware that technically didn't attach back to anything Voss controlled. But the transfers in matched the transfers out of his accounts to the penny, with a 2-day delay. Enough to look like coincidence, not enough to actually be one. She pulled the registration documents. The name on the account was a woman named Carol Finch, which she was certain was fake, but the secondary contact was Rayleigh. She printed it out, sat with it. Then she went and knocked on Voss's office door. He was on the phone. He ended the call when she came in, which again, unusual. Most men she'd worked for made you stand there while they finished. He just ended it. She put the printout on his desk. He looked at it for a long time without saying anything. "You're sure?" he said. "Not a question, exactly. The probability that this is coincidence is..." She did the math in her head, roughly 1 in 400,000, so, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Rayleigh has been with me for 11 years. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. "You understand what this means," he said. "What happens next?" She understood that she was in a room with a man who ran something very serious, and that the information she'd just handed him would have very serious consequences for another person, and that she was not naive enough to believe those consequences would be a stern talking to. "I found the numbers," she said. "What you do with them isn't my department." He looked at her. Something she shifted in his expression, not quite appreciation, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. "Most people would be uncomfortable with that answer," he said. "Most people don't spend 3 weeks living inside someone else's fraudulent accounting," she said. "You get philosophical." He almost smiled. She noticed, because it seemed like something that didn't happen often enough to be unremarkable. "I owe you," he said. "You're paying me," she said. "That's different from owing." "No," he said, "it isn't." She thought about that on the way home. She was still thinking about it 3 days later, when Tamsin told her the apartment situation had changed. Her brother-in-law had gotten a job offer in Portland. They were moving in 6 weeks, and Lena was going to need to find somewhere to go. She sat at the kitchen table after Tamsin went to bed and stared at the ceiling and did the math. 2 weeks of severance, mostly gone. 3 weeks of consulting fees from Voss, which were generous enough that she'd been startled by the number, but not generous enough to make a dent in first-last deposit in this city. Her phone buzzed at 11 o'clock. "Voss," she answered, because she had nothing else to do. "Riley is no longer a problem," he said. "But I have a different one." She waited. "There are people," he said, "who believe that because I handled Riley internally, I have something to hide, which means they're going to look very hard at every account I have, legal and otherwise. I need someone who can make the legal ones look exactly as clean as they are. Not more, not less. Just accurate. That's just bookkeeping," she said. "For people who want to find something," he said, "the difference between clean books, and obviously cleaned books, is about 30 minutes. She understood what he meant. She'd seen it. the overcorrections, the gaps where numbers had been neatened into legibility, the telltale symmetry of accounts that had been manually adjusted rather than organically developed. "You need it to look like real," she said. "I need it to be real," he said. "The rest will take care of itself." She looked at the ceiling. 6 weeks. No apartment, no job. A very niche skill set that had just gotten her fired from the last place that wanted it. "I need a place to live," she said. A pause. "I have buildings. I'm not going to live in one of your buildings." "Why not?" "Because then you'd own where I sleep, and that's a different kind of leverage than I'm comfortable with." Another pause. Longer this time. "There's an apartment," he said. "Adjacent property. I don't own it. A trust does. And the trust is managed by an attorney whose loyalty is to the trust documents. Not to me. I'll have him contact you." She lay there in the dark for a long moment. "This is a lot of favors," she said. "You found what 4 accountants missed," he said. "In 3 weeks. I have a different view of what constitutes a favor." She moved in on a Saturday. The apartment was the nicest place she'd ever lived. She made a note of that, and then made herself stop making notes about it, because it was important not to confuse gratitude with debt. She worked for Voss. She had started thinking of it that way, working for Voss, even though the checks came from a consulting company, and technically she was an independent contractor. For 3 more months before the thing she hadn't named started becoming harder to ignore. It wasn't anything dramatic. He didn't show up at her door with flowers. He didn't say anything he shouldn't. He was, in fact, remarkably precise about the division between professional and personal, which was what made the edges of that division so noticeable. The coffee on the corner of her desk every morning. The way he remembered, 6 weeks in, that she didn't take sugar, which shouldn't have meant anything but did. The afternoon a man came into her office, low level, from the look of him, middle management in whatever Voss's organizational structure actually looked like, and stood in her doorway, speaking in a tone she didn't like. And 15 minutes later, Voss appeared in the same doorway, said 3 words to the man that she didn't catch, and the man left and never came back. She didn't ask about it. He didn't explain it. What he did, 2 days later, was knock on her office door and say, "If anyone makes you uncomfortable in this building, I need you to tell me." She looked at him. "I can handle uncomfortable," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not the point." She thought about that for a long time. The night everything clarified itself, she was working late. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that Voss was also working late, and at some point she became aware that the building was otherwise empty, and then she became aware that she could hear him on the phone 2 offices down, and that his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before. Not angry, exactly, but tight. Controlled in a way that suggested control was costing something. She should have put on her headphones. She didn't. The call ended. Silence. Then footsteps. He stopped in her doorway. He looked tired in a way that went past the face and settled somewhere behind it. "I didn't know you were still here," he said. "I'm always still here," she said. "Go home." He looked at her. "I don't," he said, and stopped. She understood what he didn't say. She'd seen it before, in the way the office ran, in the way Fletcher shadowed him, in the way his phone was always on the desk rather than in his pocket, because he needed to see it at all times. Men like Voss don't have places to go at the end of the day. They have locations. "Then sit down," she said. He did. He took the chair in the corner, which was where he always sat, and she turned back to her screen and kept working, and neither of them said anything. And after about 20 minutes, she heard his breathing change in the way that meant he'd fallen asleep. She let him. She finished the reconciliation she was working on, shut down her computer, put on her coat, and paused in the doorway on her way out. He looked different, asleep, less assembled. The scar on his hand was visible where his sleeve had pulled back, and there were more of them on his forearm that she'd never noticed before, and his face had lost the particular quality of maintenance that it wore during the day. She turned off the light and left. She did not think about what that meant. She thought about it for the entire drive home. 3 weeks later, a man named Dex Callahan came to the office. She'd never heard of him, but Fletcher's posture changed when he walked in, which told her everything she needed to know. He went into Voss's office. She turned up her music. She heard it anyway, not the words. The shape of it, the kind of conversation where two people are very careful not to raise their voices because they understand the weight of what they're saying. Dex Callahan left 40 minutes later. Fletcher walked him to the elevator in the particular way that meant he was also making sure Callahan went to the elevator and not anywhere else. She waited. Voss appeared in her doorway. He had the look he sometimes got, not upset, not frightened, just recalibrating. Like a man updating a map. There's a situation, he said. There's always a situation, she said. This one involves you. She set down her pen. The situation, as it turned out, was that Callahan believed, incorrectly, that Lena had access to certain account information beyond what she'd been given. Specifically, he believed she'd seen routing numbers attached to a particular set of transfers that Voss had made 3 years ago, before she'd ever come to work there. He believed this because someone had told him so, and the someone was still unidentified. I didn't see anything from 3 years ago, she said. I know, he said. Then why is this a problem? Because Callahan doesn't care what you actually saw, he said. He cares what you might testify to if someone asked you. She was quiet for a moment. And will someone ask me? He met her eyes. Not if I can help it, he said. But I want to be honest with you about what that requires. What it required, as he explained it with the same flatness he brought to most things, was temporary. Visibility. Specifically, the kind of visibility that made her association with him unambiguous enough that moving against her became moving against him. You want people to think I'm important to you, she said. I want people to know you're important to me, he said, which is not the same thing. She stared at him. He said it so simply, without dramatics. The way he said everything, like a man reading from a ledger that he understood completely. That's a very strange thing to say, she said. It's an accurate one, he said. I thought you'd appreciate accuracy. She looked at her desk, at the stack of files she'd been working through, at the coffee cup she'd moved to the corner that morning, the one he'd left there. You could have just said it was for protection, she said. That would have been easier than what, he said. She didn't have an answer to that. She thought she probably did, but wasn't ready to give it yet. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay, I said okay. Don't make it weird. He didn't make it weird. What he did over the following weeks was the same things he'd always done. The coffee, the chair in the corner, the questions that were actually listening. But now with the addition of the occasional dinner, the occasional car that arrived at her building, when she hadn't called one, the occasional presence of Fletcher slightly closer than usual. She was not good at this. She had been, for most of her adult life, excellent at being underestimated, at moving through spaces without taking up too much room. What Voss was asking her to do in his particular way of asking for things was occupy space differently. She tried. The night Callahan's associates showed up outside her building, she called Voss before she called anyone else. She didn't know why. She knew why. He was there in 11 minutes. She counted. He came upstairs, looked at the window she'd been watching from, looked at her and said, You're not afraid. I'm extremely afraid, she said. I'm also not going to show them that. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I didn't think you would. He sat across from her in the small kitchen of the apartment that the trust managed. And they waited together while Fletcher and 2 other men she'd never learned the names of handled whatever was happening outside. And at some point she made coffee because it gave her hands something to do. Why bookkeeping? He said at some point. She looked up. What? Why bookkeeping? He said again. You're smart enough for anything. Why numbers? She thought about it. Numbers don't have opinions, she said. They're wrong or they're right. Nobody can tell you you're being too sensitive about a number. Either it balances or it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. I've spent a lot of my life, he said, around people who have very flexible relationships with what's true. I know, she said. You make it, he said slowly. Very difficult to be anything other than straightforward. She looked at him. Good, she said. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at the whiteboard in his office, like he was solving for something and had just found the variable that made the rest of it cohere. The Callahan situation resolved. She didn't ask how. She had enough context to fill in the broad strokes and decided the broad strokes were sufficient. What she did ask on a Tuesday morning when he set the coffee down and didn't immediately go back to his office was, when does this stop? He didn't pretend not to understand what she was asking. The arrangement, he said. The arrangement, the protection. The visibility. All of it. He was quiet for a moment. The morning light was coming through the window behind him. Outside, 2 floors down, the parking garage sat in its ordinary concrete silence. It doesn't have to, he said. Stop! She looked at him. She thought about the $200 in her account, the form she'd signed, the sticky floor of a bar on a Wednesday afternoon, and a man sitting down next to her with a scar on his hand and a last name that meant something. She thought about 6 years of being the most useful person in any room she was in, and nobody noticing. She thought about the way he listened. I'm not a person you keep, she said. I'm a person you work with. Those are different things. I know the difference, he said. I'm asking you to consider that they're not mutually exclusive. She looked at her coffee, his coffee, the 2 cups on the corner of her desk. I'm going to keep finding things that are wrong, she said. That's what I do, and when I find them, you have to tell me the truth about them. Yes, he said. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially then, he said. That's the only version of this that works. She looked at him for a long moment. The books are clean, she said. They've been clean for 6 weeks. I know, he said. You're still bringing me coffee. Yes, he said. She picked up her cup. The Meridian Holdings sub-account, she said. There's a discrepancy in the quarterly filing. 3rd column, line 22. Whoever set it up was rounding to 2 decimal places instead of 4. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Show me, he said. She turned her screen toward him. Outside, the city ran its ordinary numbers, the unseen accounts, the transfers in the wrong place, the money that moved when nobody was looking. In here, 2 people sat across a desk in the particular morning, quiet of a space where the books were honest, and that was enough, for now, to balance.